Three, two, and one. Hello again, Matt Davio back. I've got a special guest with us today. I've got Bill Ferrariaolo. Hey, Bill. Thanks for joining us today. Bill's coming to us from, let's call it Central to Northern California. He is a PhD in philosophy, and he's written a relatively new book on Stoicism, and it's an angle as a trader that I think will help a lot of us, and that is called, the book is called Meditations on Self-Discipline and Failure, subtitled Stoic Exercise for Mental Fitness. Bill, thanks for coming on today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You're most welcome. So you and I had to reschedule with you a couple times. I appreciate it. I want to say thank you on the air because gratitude matters. And thank you for spending your time with us today. So PhD in philosophy from Norman, Oklahoma. You went to the University of Oklahoma.
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit about your past that kind of took you on that road to discovery.
Yeah, I've told this story a couple times. I'll give you the Reader's Digest abridged version of what happened. On my 18th birthday, I blew out my knee at wrestling practice. Absolutely shredded it. ACL, MCL, meniscus. And the reason that's relevant is I had an ROTC scholarship to go to college. So I had college paid for, and then all of a sudden I did not have college paid for because the Army didn't want me anymore after I was damaged goods.
Really?
Yeah, they took away the scholarship. So had to find a way to pay for school, had to find a new major. I had planned on going into the military. So I was taking some courses, just sort of seeing what fit my schedule, what interested me. And I realized that I fell in love with philosophy. Stumbled through undergraduate. When I applied to graduate school, I did a poor job of it and ended up getting accepted to a couple of places, Duke and Boston University, but not enough funding to go without piling up massive debt. Luckily for me, Oklahoma offered me a teaching assistantship, and it turns out it was a really, really good program, a lot of really talented people there. Spent 6 years there. Eventually somebody shoves a PhD at you and says, go get a job, Tiger. And I didn't know how to do that. So applied everywhere and landed at San Joaquin Delta College in Stockton. Lived in Stockton for 18 years. 3 years ago, I married a wonderful, beautiful woman named Jennifer who lives up here in Lodi from the, Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Yeah.
Oh Lord, stuck in Lodi. That's where I am.
Most people probably don't even know what he says in that line.
Yeah, they probably don't.
But you just told them. That's fantastic.
There it is.
All right. So you guys have been married 3 years and teaching at the college there in Stockton.
For
21 years you've been teaching.
That's correct.
Okay, so that's a long time. What do you like about your job? What do you love about teaching?
I love getting my students excited about philosophy, a subject that I have to assume most of them only take because it fits their schedule, kind of like that's the reason I took it when I was in college. I love demonstrating to them that philosophy is applicable to their lives. There are practical applications. It is both fascinating and relevant. And I like having about 4 months off a year too.
The truth comes out. I gotcha.
Gives me an opportunity to do things like write books.
So let's talk a little bit about this meditations on self-discipline and failure. Where does that come from in your deep studies? Because you've obviously studied a lot in the philosophical ways, and you obviously probably have some favorites, and we'll get into some of those. And what are some of your favorite or famous Stoics that you could probably tell us a little bit about in your way?
Well, by far and away, my favorite Stoic philosopher from the Greco-Roman world is Epictetus. He was born a slave, literally another person's property. According to the standard canonical story, his first owner had him frequently tortured by twisting his leg. Other slaves would hold him down and twist his leg until it snapped. And apparently they did this so many times that his leg was literally on backward. His foot was facing the wrong way. But he eventually got his manumission. I believe his first owner died, and The second owner decided, well, this is a really smart guy. This guy should have his freedom. Established a school at Nicopolis, and he came to be very influential throughout the Roman Empire. Marcus Aurelius, the last great Roman emperor, who wrote his own meditations, was heavily influenced by Epictetus. So Epictetus is kind of my favorite Stoic. I'm also really partial to Diogenes, who was a Cynic philosopher, not a Stoic, and I'm at least as much a Cynic as a Stoic, but that's perhaps another story.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about how would you define Stoicism for somebody maybe that is unfamiliar. You know, even though in today's world, I would say it's pretty relevant. You know, you've got your book out there. Tim Ferriss has got a book kind of, you know, recapping. Shane Parrish is out there talking about Stoicism. What is it about the Stoic mindset, do you think, that is suited for today's world?
Sure. Some other guys worth mentioning. Ryan Holiday has a number of top-selling books out there. Donald Robertson, Massimo Pigliucci, John Sellers. A lot of really smart people out there writing about Stoicism, all of whom, by the way, are much smarter than I am. But here's what I can tell you about the heart of Stoicism. Stoicism is what in fancy, pretentious philosopher talk we call a eudaimonistic philosophy. Eudaimony is just a Greek word for flourishing or living well and doing well. It's often translated as happiness, but really it means living well, living virtuously. So according to Stoicism, we should focus only on what we can control. That is, focus our efforts, our mental energies on that which lies within our control. They call all of those phenomena internals, whereas all that which lies beyond the control of the will, beyond the sphere of what they call the prohairesis, which is your faculty of judgment and choice and deliberation, all of those are externals. They're beyond our control. We should take note of what's going on, but focus on the internals that we can control. And what we ought to do, a well-lived life, is a life lived in the pursuit of wisdom and virtue. So we should be trying to acquire, trying to enhance our wisdom, our courage, our justice, and our temperance or self-discipline. And my book is largely about the attempt to develop self-discipline and the realization that I constantly fail at this attempt, but I also constantly, reassert the effort to fail less in the future.
Progress.
Progress is the goal, not any idealization is unlikely.
Perfection. Right.
Right. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
You know, I love, and that's really, I think, what has attracted me to this type of philosophy also, is that, especially in trading, right? I mean, we have very little that we can control in trading and in our lives, I believe. And what we can control in the way we respond, react, speak, is somewhat limited. And, you know, I'll speak for myself, I make a lot of mistakes in my business life, in my trading life, and I've been doing this for 28 years. But, you know, today would be a great example of it. I really came in with a good game plan. It started out great, and then the market decided to do what it did, and kind of went from a great day to a kind of day.
The world does not always cooperate, does it?
It generally doesn't cooperate, and for me, where I can kind of settle with that is, okay, I've seen this before, where, you know, I'll survive, and I'll wake up tomorrow and we'll try it again. And that's really it's having, as a father of 4 kids, you know, it's very difficult for me to try to share that wisdom with 4 teenagers. Well, one's just out of teendom, but you know, I've got 2 in college. I've got a son actually taking a philosophy class right now as a freshman, and he loves it. So I'm encouraged.
Well, I don't know. You might have to worry about that kid.
You know, let's get into like a little bit. Do you think that there was the founding fathers of this country, do you think there was a lot of the founding fathers who studied Stoicism?
I suspect so. I would be very surprised if Jefferson, for example, was not very aware of Stoic philosophy as well as other Hellenistic schools. In the Hellenistic period, after Aristotle died, after Alexander the Great died, that's when you get Cynicism, Stoicism, Epicureanism, skepticism, other competing schools. And many of our founders, Franklin was almost certainly, aware of much of the history of philosophy. Hamilton, I'm sure, was interested in an assortment of different philosophers. A number of our founders clearly read Aristotle's Politics. If you read the Constitution and then you read John Locke's Second Treatise of Civil Government, you'll see a lot of similarities there because they were fans of Locke. They read Hobbes and Leviathan. So I don't know how much they explicitly wrote about Stoicism, but I would be very surprised if they were not, not aware of it and its impact.
It's a lot of, from my understanding of the history that I've read about Hamilton, I actually find him to be the father of intervention. And so I find a lot of hypocrisy, I guess, in what has now become the Hamilton story versus maybe the reality of the story, which is he's the father of intervention, which as a trader, I look at that as the euro, I look at that as the IMF, all these things that try to control currencies in the world. So I find that to be fascinating. Nobody really talks about it, but that's because not enough people in our country study history or the philosophy behind the people in it.
Hamilton, now check me if I'm wrong, he was Washington's Secretary of the Treasury, is that correct? Mm-hmm. And I guess it's not that surprising that someone who serves in that role, might cook up theories of intervention in the financial system. But I'm not going to pretend to know enough about Hamilton to know exactly why he turns out to be the father of interventionism. And I'm not going to pretend to know whether interventionism tends to be good or bad, although I lean toward thinking that it's usually does more harm than good. But that's me. I don't know. I'm not an economist.
I'm no economist either, and really, we tend to. I tend to agree with you mostly on the, and we'll see how that all plays out. But that being said, what are some of the things in the self-discipline and traits that you feel that people can learn from reading your book? Because I think this is an important topic, right? That you're gonna fail, you're gonna make mistakes, and how do you pick yourself up and progress, as we talked about? Trying to strive towards betterment versus perfection. And I think in this day and age that we live in, especially, I see this with my kids, whether it's FOMO, whether somebody has a shinier car, a prettier girlfriend, right? There's all this distraction and noise that is there to really take you away from contemplation. Sure. And I think contemplation is really a key component to progress in one's life.
Yeah, it certainly is. And one of the difficulties is that long before we are able to reason, long before we are able to contemplate anything, we are already caught up in desire and aversion. We're already caught up as infants. As we emerge from the womb, we are caught up in being driven by irrational and irrational impulses. Things frighten us, and we associate that with being bad or evil. Other things comfort us, and we associate that with being good, being desirable, etc. So long before we can defend ourselves, rationally speaking, we're already in the grip of the external world, and it pushes and pulls on us, and it gives us feelings and impulses against which we cannot defend ourselves. So some years ago, I wrote a paper called the IDEA method, the IDEA method. And it really is, I present this, I explain it on kind of a medical model. So I'll try and go through this pretty quickly so it doesn't take too much time, but
that's okay.
Okay. The I stands for identify the real issue. If you've got think of this as the symptom, right? What is the presenting symptom? I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm ill at ease, I am, I'm less than serene, right? Well, what exactly is happening? How is the external world affecting you in such a way as to cause this internal turmoil, right? The problem is internal. The problem is going to be in here. The world out there simply is as it is. It does what it does, and it lies beyond our control. If it makes us angry or frustrated or upset in any way, it is wise to search, to introspect about what it is that has triggered or caused this response in me. So there's your symptom. You're upset, you're ill at ease. D refers to distinguish between the internal factors and the external factors. Distinguish between what is within your control and what is outside of your control. So what is the diagnosis of the problem here? Let's say that someone has sent me an email criticizing me, using insulting terminology, cursing at me over the email, whatever the case may be. Now, I have no control over what this person thinks, what this person says, what this person types. I can control, with practice and with mental discipline, I can control my emotional, my psychological response to it. Right? I'm perfectly capable of looking at this and saying, look, these are pixels on a screen. I do not have to internalize this as an insult. I do not have to internalize this as an assault on my person. Right? Without my complicity, you can't insult me. Without my complicity, you can't hurt my feelings. So if my feelings are hurt, if I'm insulted, if I'm angry, I am largely doing that to myself. I can withdraw my consent to be affected in that way. Right? E refers to exert effort where it can be effective, right? I cannot reach into that person's mind. I cannot reach into that person's conscience and change that person's assessment of me. I can't make that person like me, believe what I wish that person would believe, assess me in any particular way. I can exert the effort to govern myself, to try and respond to this interaction in a wise fashion, in a rational fashion, in a virtuous fashion, with self-discipline, rather than like a 4-year-old, stomp my feet, curse back at him, send him back a vicious email in reply, etc. And then A, but that by the way is the prognosis. The prognosis is this is not a terminal condition. Right. This can be, if not cured, it can be at least managed, right? And finally, A stands for accept the rest, accept the external course of events, because you have no choice. The world is going to go as it's going to go. The world always wins. The world always has its way. Accept that fact. And Nietzsche, who is not exactly a Stoic, but he uses this phrase, amor fati, which I believe may also have been mentioned by earlier philosophers. Amor fati roughly translates to love of fate, right? Learn to embrace the fact that we live in a world that allows us to draw breath, allows us to eat food, allows us to have, conversations on this miraculous technology that did not exist just a decade ago. If you focus on the fact that we live in an anthropic universe that allows for intelligent life, apparently against all odds, by the way, whether you believe an intelligent designer fixed it this way or whether it's just dumb luck and happenstance, we're awfully fortunate either way. So the cure to, first you have the symptom, then you have the diagnosis and the prognosis. The cure is to exert rational control over the internals, over your thought processes, to manage your beliefs, your desires, your expectations, to challenge the beliefs, desires, and expectations that are irrational, that are likely to lead to frustration, right? You can learn to heal yourself rather than contending against external reality, because that is a losing proposition. Hope I didn't go on for too long there. Sorry if I did.
No, I think this is entirely valid, and I think it's the context is spot on. Now, I think there's a lot of conflict in our society, whether depending on if you are a faithful person, if you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Jew, Buddhist, right? You have these inherent belief systems from the community, including your parental system, a family system, and that can be good, bad. Again, here we go with the categorizing the good and the bad.
Sure.
And I think that in itself is something personally that I definitely try to not categorize black and white, gray, everything's kind of, as you said, just is. And I find that monkey brain piece, reacting to foolish comments that may be untrue. It may, that's a good example. Like, putting yourself out there and interviewing people, you get a lot of stupid comments, and most of the time I can not take the bait. What are some of the tools that you have utilized through your studies and your teachings that have helped you in a situation like that, in your diagnosis, your prognosis, and then how do you affect change so that when you get in that situation, and they'll come again and again and again,
yeah.
That you react in a way that you are virtuous, and what are some of the things that you've done yourself?
It definitely recurs again and again. The external world is relentless, and if you let it push you around, and if you let it take control of your mood, of your attitude, that's just disastrous, because the world will drive you insane given the slightest chance to do so. The first thing I would recommend is getting to know oneself well enough, and you have to be honest about this. Often it's quite difficult to recognize and admit to our various flaws and weaknesses, of which I know I have many, many, many flaws and weaknesses. You have to be aware of what tends to trigger your anger response, or your frustration response, or your fear response, or whatever the unwholesome psychological or emotional state might be. You have to recognize it when it happens. With practice, you can learn to anticipate it, learn to kind of gird yourself for battle before you wade into where it's going to come up. Marcus Aurelius mentions this in book 2 of his meditations. I think it's the first entry, the first meditation. He says that he reminds himself, when you wake up in the morning, remind yourself, today I'm going to meet with, and then there's a litany of human foibles and failures and misbehaviors, right? I'm going to meet with liars and greed and selfishness. Remind yourself, these are the kinds of things that tend to get me angry and frustrated. And for different people, of course, it's going to be different things. For some people, traffic drives them out of their mind. Others, not that bothered by it. So first, know what sets you off in a negative or unhealthy fashion. Once you have learned a bit about that, and you're probably never going to fully understand all of that, because some of our triggers are undoubtedly subconscious or elements of our unconscious, but we do the best we can to kind of see it coming, to experience, to feel it coming. Once you do that, learn to challenge the underlying causes of the negative state. So if you have an expectation that tends to lead to frustration frequently, it's time to ask yourself, is that an irrational expectation, right? I often tell people, if you expect the world to be gentle with you, if you expect the world at large to be respectful of your desires, to not impinge upon you in an undesirable fashion, you're living in a different world than I am. The world is constantly going to smack you in the face and hit you with all the kinds of things that trouble you. So govern your expectations, govern your beliefs. I meet people all the time who seem to believe that they're entitled to be treated a certain way. They're entitled to be respected by complete strangers who have never met them. I don't know where that sense of entitlement comes from. Actually, I have some theories about where it comes from. Well, we might get to that later. But that's an unwise belief that leads to an unwise expectation. Of course, you're going to feel constantly triggered, offended, frustrated if you expect everyone to treat you with kid gloves and to only behave in ways that you find palatable. That's not how the world works.
Right.
And once you know what sets you off, once you identify some of the unhealthy beliefs, expectations, desires, etc., you have to really work on mitigating those. You have to really work on challenging those when they arise, and gradually using your mental discipline to cause them to subside, to dissipate, and hopefully to eventually vanish. Getting them to vanish entirely is, that's a Herculean task, but I don't know that it can't be done. I know my expectations these days are quite different than before I discovered Stoicism. I used to have a very, very, very bad temper and was very easily and quickly triggered and went from 0 to 60 in no seconds flat.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now I just have a moderately bad temper. And instead of going from 0 to 60, I'll go from 0 to 10, and I'll say, wait a minute, hold on a second. And I'll be able to talk myself back down, usually, not always.
So it's interesting that you came from a athletic background. You said you were a wrestler, and obviously that was a great outlet for some of that anger, right?
Right.
But did you even through your competitions, were you really ever able to relinquish that anger without thought?
No, I was never able to. For me, it wasn't really the anxiety was the worst part for me. I played football, I wrestled, and I did some boxing. And especially when it comes to wrestling and boxing, when you're out there alone,
Mm-hmm.
when you're on a football field, you're one of 11 guys. So you know that the people watching, their attention is, is sort of spread across the 11 people. You're the only guy on the mat wrestling. And if you get pinned, you're the only guy that people are watching get pinned. Or if you're in the ring and you get knocked out, you're the only guy people are going to see collapse to the canvas. So I had a lot of anxiety about especially boxing and wrestling. But I kind of sensed early on that I had to confront that. And the good thing about football, wrestling, and boxing is I got to work off a lot of the nervous energy that, had I not worked it off, would have led to angry outbursts. And then once I blew my knee out, and I could no longer engage in combat and collision sports,
Mm-hmm.
I think that was part of what led to this the exacerbation of my anger. I wasn't able to get that energy out in the way I used to. I used to go to the gym for hours and hours and hours, but it's not the same as punching somebody. It's not the same as wrestling somebody. It's not the same as hitting someone full speed. So you combine that with just a predisposition to anxiety and depression, which I inherited from my dad. And it can lead to disaster. And I've done a few of these interviews now, and I always mention this. My brother Vinny, we're an Italian family from New Jersey, so we have to have one kid named Vinny. It's in the Constitution. Vinny actually committed suicide a few years ago.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Precisely because governing this condition did not work out in his case. It got the better of him. And I could have gone the same way. Had I not gotten some help and also discovered Stoicism, I could easily have ended up either like Vinny or in prison, or who knows, God knows where.
What's interesting about that story is I think a lot of us can go that way, and a lot of people I think look at Stoicism as a negative philosophy. I'm sure you hear, and you probably hear that from people.
Sure.
Why do you think the uninitiated? Because I think once you get into it, I don't believe it is a negative, half empty type thing. I think it's just kind of stating the facts. I like to say, real or memorax, right? Emotion,
right.
Or is it tangible? Is it really something there? is one of the ways I like to look at it, especially in the trading world where it's one big trap game. Everybody's trying to fake out the other guy. I mean, it's a lot like, although I haven't done it, it's a lot like hand-to-hand combat. It's the art of war, right? It's the whole kind of way of being, right? You're surviving to go on. You're surviving to survive. And so why do you think people look at it, and then tying it back to why it works, why it worked for you? Why do they look at it as a negative? And then when you got into it, why was it such a beneficial moment for you to study that and change your life course?
I think one central piece of the problem is a semantic glitch. There's a crucial distinction between uppercase S Stoic philosophy and lowercase s Stoicism or a Stoic attitude. People tend to think of having a Stoic attitude as being emotionless, being emotionally and psychologically flat. Often the paradigmatic example of the Stoic, people think of the character Spock from Star Trek. He only refers to logic. He only deals in logic. He has no emotions, etc. That might be the paradigmatic example of lowercase s Stoicism, but uppercase s Stoicism is about finding joy, finding fulfillment, finding eudaimonia, finding a fulfilling life through self-discipline and the attainment of virtue. William Irvine, who's a really smart guy, he's a philosopher who writes about Stoicism, a lot smarter than I am. He's got maybe the best contemporary introduction to Stoicism you can get your hands on. It's called On the Good Life, the Ancient Art of Stoic Joy. So I think a lot of people, they associate Stoicism with kind of keep a stiff upper lip, don't show your emotions, or better yet, just extirpate your emotions, don't have any emotions. And that's not appealing. No. Who would want to live an entirely emotionless existence, right?
Right.
So if you think that's what Stoicism is, yeah, of course you reject it. What Stoicism actually is, of course, is learning to experience positive emotions and not to be driven by what the Stoics might have called passions, the kind of overpowering emotions that lead us to destructive behaviors that are destructive to ourselves and to others. And there is a real genuine fulfillment to learning how to govern oneself so as not to cause needless trouble for others, and to govern oneself in such a way as to attain heights of rational self-discipline that most people don't approach. It's analogous to being a top flight athlete. Not that I think I am that, but take someone who approaches the ideal of the Stoic sage. Take someone like Epictetus or Socrates. These guys were the Tiger Woods of reason, the Michael Jordans of reason. And I imagine the same type of fulfillment is derived from that as from being the best in your sport, in your discipline, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think there's no way, and since we're right in the middle of the Olympiad right now, this is a good conversation piece to jump off on. I see these athletes like Schifrin, the skier, the 22-year-old. I mean, she's amazing to me. Forget about her skiing, but her mental component to me is just that. To me, I find pure joy in watching her kind of talk about her weaknesses, which are probably no different. The difference between all these super uber athletes is so minuscule. They're all so good, right? But I think what ends up making them great in the end, whether it's Tiger, and it's also the thing that killed Tiger, is their mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Always. The top flight athletes, the best athletes in any sport you might want to choose, they're almost always the ones that have the greatest mental discipline, either naturally or they've developed it, through assiduous training. Tiger's dad apparently was a Green Beret, I believe. Mm-hmm. And Tiger asks, hey, can you make me tough? Can you make me mentally tough? And his dad said, yeah, but you're not going to like it. And I guess it worked in application to golf, at least for a while.
Yeah.
Perhaps not so much in other spheres, but that's not my business. I don't want to criticize the guy.
Right.
And you hear the same thing about Michael Jordan. You look, I'm a big fan of mixed martial arts. I'm a big UFC fan. And all of these guys are strong and fast and flexible, and they all know Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu and boxing and wrestling. But the guys who are at the top of their game are just unflappable. They get hit with a shot that would decapitate the average human being. And they even if they get wobbled, even if they get rocked, they shake it off and they focus back on the game plan.
Right.
Or they get caught in a choke that would, put most people out, and they manage to scramble. They manage to maintain mental discipline. They manage to remain rational and think their way out of it. Usually, I mean, sometimes you get, KTFOED, as they say. Sometimes you just get knocked out, but then they bounce back from it, the tough ones.
Well, and that's why I think the Mayweather fight last summer with
Conor McGregor.
Yeah, both like for me, I could see both guys winning because of their mental toughness.
Right. And Conor, in the post-fight interview, when he was asked, so what do you think Mayweather's advantage was? He said composure.
Yeah.
He's done this his whole life, and even though I'm a fighter, Conor said, I'm paraphrasing, even though I'm a fighter, this is my first official boxing match, and I'm fighting one of the best ever. And it drains you. It drains you psychologically and physically. Nothing will drain you faster than stress. I remember I used to go to wrestling practice. We would practice hard. We would wrestle hard and run hard for a good hour and a half to 2 hours, and I'd be just fine. Yeah. Then 2 days later, I'd have a match. We'd go for 6 minutes, and I'm dead tired by the end of it because of the anxiety, because of the stress. It's so much of it is in here. People don't realize how much of the difference between greatness and mediocrity is in here.
Yep. And I think in having a strong constitution and a flexible mind is also, they're counterintuitive, right? They're kind of opposite of each other sometimes. Like, you need to be firm, but you need to be able to be flexibly firm at times, I think.
Right. There is a difference between strength and rigidity. Mm-hmm. Some people are very psychologically and mentally rigid, and when the world changes, as it tends to do constantly, they can't assimilate change very easily, and those people invariably struggle. And I'm a bit this way myself. But if you are mentally strong, but also you rationally understand that the world invariably is going to change, circumstances are going to change, you can meet that change while maintaining your emotional, intellectual integrity. So strong and rigid, not exactly the same thing.
So we're in a weird world always, and we're in a really strange world now, 1 year after Trump has been elected. Let's not talk about politics, but let's talk about the angst that just continues to build up from those that still can't believe that he's president.
Right.
And it's like, it pains me to watch that, in the sense that, how would a Stoic look at that situation, and what kind of skills would a Stoic teach those who are stuck in the past when we're moving forward one way or another?
Well, I work in academics. So as you might guess, I'm surrounded by people who are very, 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 very liberal. I think many of them don't quite understand just how far left they are. Mm-hmm. And I'm one of those rare academics. I'm very conservative. I'm pretty far right, certainly by comparison with these folks. Sure. So the outcry when Trump was elected, I'll just tell you, if this kills the sales of my book, it kills the sales of my book. I voted for Trump. I'm very pleased that Trump won. I had nothing but contempt for Hillary. So Trump's election, the great challenge for me, the two great challenges for me was, first of all, not gloating, because all of my colleagues told me how stupid. I was one of these people who predicted that Trump was going to be the Republican nominee. And then once he got the nomination, I predicted he was going to win until that Access Hollywood tape came out. And I thought, well, so there that goes. So, everyone told me that I was a fool for thinking he had a chance. He's a carnival barker, blah, blah. And I kept telling him, no, this guy has got persuasive skills. You don't understand. So there was that challenge. Then the challenge was all the recriminations and all the remarks directed at me after he won, in person, over email, phone calls. It was my fault that this guy won, and this guy is Satan, and now everything that happens is my fault. It was a challenge not to respond in kind, a challenge to which I did not always rise perfectly. I did fire back on occasion, but I don't think I ever felt good about having done it in retrospect. So what do you teach people? First of all, you can't control who wins a presidential election. You can vote or not. You can talk to people. You can try and persuade people, but persuading people out of their ideological leanings is notoriously difficult.
Impossible.
And then when the election is over, you can either respond after the fashion of an adult in possession of his reason or her reason, or you can lose your mind, like these people who are smashing windows in the street, and these people who are protesting on the day of Trump's inauguration, as if he might respond by saying, "Oh, okay, in that case, never mind. Hillary can be president. I'll just step down." And of course, they're desperately trying to impeach him, and they latch onto every internet rumor. Oh, I hear that the Flynn thing is going to get him, and I hear that this alleged thing with the porn star is going to get him. I want to pull him aside and say, first of all, it's wildly unlikely anything's going to get him. Secondly, whether that happens or not, tethering your emotional state to any outcome of this investigation is unwise. I don't care what side you're on.
I agree. And
it's unwise and unhealthy.
This is the thing that again, doesn't matter what you voted on at this point a year later, and whether he is impeached or not is also out of my control.
Right.
If he does something illegal, he'll be impeached. But
maybe.
Right. But my point is, if you again, the polarization that is going on in this country right now is and it's both ways, right? Extremely right and extremely left. And the middle, which I like to consider myself pretty middle of the ground. There's some things I like about him. There's some things I don't like about him, and that's just me. That's my opinion, and that's all it is. And when it's hard to pick up any newspaper and not have these feelings, even if I'm right in the middle of, gosh, both of these people are nuts. Both sides are nuts.
Being in the middle, you probably catch vitriol from both sides, right?
Exactly.
How dare you not hate this guy, and how dare you not support this guy blindly? I mean, like I said, I voted for him, and I actually kind of like the guy, but I'm not blind to his character flaws. I'm not.
But you're also not blind to the character flaws of said candidate that was running against him. So you're fair in that regard. Yeah, whatever.
Right, and I understand. I mean, we all ought to understand that politicians, by their very nature, almost have to be hucksters. They almost have to be, in some sense, salespeople. Who expects politicians to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth at all times? What adult expects that? So when people point out, well, he lied about this or she lied about that, gee, no kidding. I'm shocked, I say.
And then what I find fascinating is the accusation level of the news. As you said, every day here's a new, gosh, you turn on Rachel Maddow every night and she's got them lynched. She's got them lynched out and hanging every night, and I'm like, wow. Yeah. But she never retracts. She never redacts, and the next night she's on to the next thing. I mean, and every night she's like, aha.
Right. Here, just for kicks, every once in a while I'll do this. I'll flip back and forth between Fox and CNN or Fox and MSNBC, and it is as if we are occupying alternate realities. Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy, he was one of the first. Yeah, I love that guy too. One of the first ones to predict the Trump victory.
Yeah.
He talks about people watching two different movies on the same screen.
Yeah.
And that I think is a very apt analogy or metaphor for what's happening now. people are looking at the same events, and if you're a Maddow fan, you see nothing but corruption.
Right.
And if you're a Sean Hannity fan, you see nothing but virtue. Whereas, of course, the truth is there's a bit of both in there.
Right. Right.
But if you say that, if you say, well, I understand that he has these flaws, but here are the policies that I think are pretty important that he supports. If I say that to one of my colleagues, I am one of Satan's little helpers,
Yeah.
So,
So again, and I use it just as an example, but this angst that is building up with people on both sides, if you're stuck in the middle like me,
yeah.
is like you said, I think it really starts affecting the overall psyche of our culture. And so, getting back to my question, what are some of the things that people could benefit from using the Stoic philosophies, that you lay out in your book, especially, when we're talking about self-discipline and failure, right? Okay, so your guy lost or your gal lost in the vote. You'll get another chance to vote again in 3 years. We're already close to halfway through the cycle. Great. So what kinds of things could people be doing to better themselves in this situation, regardless of which pole they sit on, to kind of be more centered and be more holistic and accepting of where we are?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's really
start by distinguishing internals from externals. What is within your control, and by control I mean the direct control of your will, your ability to deliberate and choose, and distinguish between that and all the rest, the externals. Who wins the election? Can't control it. All this vitriol in the culture, all of this polarization in the culture, can't control that. I can't wave that away. I can't will that away. I can't even my own body is not directly within the control of my own will. If it were, would I look like this?
I like the beard, by the way. I do like the beard. Yeah.
Put a lot of work into that.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter how much anxiety, how much anger, how much hatred is being spewed, it seems to me the rational thing to do is to recognize that people are going to say whatever pops out of their mouths, whatever they want to say. I don't have to be upset by it. I don't have to respond to it angrily with frustration. I don't agree with anything Rachel Maddow ever says, as far as I know. But when she says things, it doesn't bother me. I don't want to reach through the screen and choke her, as I've heard some people say.
Right.
I just think, look, she is a TV personality. She has adopted the role of the avenging liberal. Maybe that's what she really believes. Maybe it's a role. None of my business, really, what she believes. Right. And some people will say, yeah, but there are people listening and they believe her. So what? Their beliefs are their business. It's not my business. It's my business to conduct myself as a rational person. A lot of people watching this interview, the moment that I said I voted for Trump, they started to hate me.
Shut it up.
Yeah. They'll either click or they'll conclude that I'm an imbecile, I'm evil, I'm whatever, a Republican troll.
Uneducated.
Uneducated, yeah. I get that one all the time. Everybody who votes for Trump is uneducated. Okay. And all of those beliefs are just fine with me. I'm sure there'll be a thread. If you post this somewhere, there'll be a thread at the bottom that this guy's an idiot. This guy's a Trump troll. This guy is whatever, the most vile things you can imagine. Mm-hmm. It would be childish of me to respond angrily to any of that. People are perfectly free to think anything they want about me. They're perfectly free to call me anything they want to. It's my fault if I let that get to me, if I let that upset me. I am the culprit if I get insulted or offended or I get my feelings hurt. I'm an adult. I'm not 3 years old. It's my fault if I allow myself to psychologically fall into their clutches, so to speak. So my job is to make sure that doesn't happen.
And the irony of the whole thing is Trump is the biggest baby of them all with his responding to whether it's LeVar Ball's dad or whoever. And part of me goes,
he must be smarter than me. He must be doing that just to antagonize people. Like part of me goes, he really must have self-control for him to allow himself to even do that. Like I start thinking like double negative, like
it's really hard to tell. He does appear to be really thin-skinned.
Yeah.
And then he also appears, at least to me, to be a very wily tactician.
Yes.
So sometimes I wonder, for example, he wrote a tweet some time ago in which he misspelled a fairly common word. And a lot of people, it wasn't the kafefe thing, but it was something subsequent to that. He misspelled a fairly common word. And of course, everybody on the left, everybody on MSNBC and CNN said, oh, look, he's an imbecile, he can't spell. I am fairly confident that he did that intentionally, because the substance of the tweet was kind of red meat for the conservative base. So they kept putting this tweet on CNN, on MSNBC, and they kept saying, look, he can't spell. But what he had manipulated him into doing was disseminating his message even further. Right. I think he does things like that. So
well, again, it's almost like your parents used to tell you, don't respond to the bully. Just don't talk to him, just don't give him don't feed the fire. That is, and by Rachel Maddow, aha, every day.
Right.
He's front and center. I mean,
exactly.
Again, she's feeding the exact thing that she thinks she's fighting every day.
He is masterful at controlling the news cycle. He played the media so many times throughout the election by convincing them that they were going to show up and be able to catch him in something, and instead they see him, putting medals on, or Congressional Medal of Honor winners or something like that. Instead of catching him, what the camera picks up is him looking presidential and looking patriotic, and I think he's very good at that. I think he also is quite thin-skinned.
I agree.
Both are true.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would like to spend a day with the guy, but
no.
I'd rather have him than Hillary in the White House. I've had people say things like this: like, "Are you telling me that you think Donald Trump is a stoic?" I say, "No, I don't. I'm not at all. No, I also don't happen to think that a stoic would necessarily make a good president at every moment in history, and I don't know that it's what we need right now. And there wasn't one available, by the way. There wasn't one.
Have we had a stoic president in your mind?
Oh, maybe. There have certainly been some who seemed more unflappable than others. We have not had a president who, is the rival of an Epictetus or a Marcus Aurelius, but somebody like Calvin Coolidge was notoriously calm and even-tempered, allegedly. So perhaps someone like that. Frankly, I doubt that Stoics in American politics would go very far. Because first of all, they're going to tell the truth.
Yeah, right.
They're going to tell the truth even to their detriment politically.
There's too much salesman. There's too much sales that needs to go on for any politician. Is again basically your stance on that. Yeah,
I believe that's correct. Yeah, I think it is enormously difficult, if not impossible, to get elected to any high public office, being brutally honest, not only about the state of the nation and its economy, but also about oneself.
What about stoicism in your personal relationships? How do you find it of service to you? You've been married now 3 years. I've been married 25 years. I've only been studying stoicism really hard for maybe a decade. So my first 15 years, I'm like every other male. I'm dumb as rocks. And
right.
I'm learning the hard way through my. Yep.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. I was going to turn the light on there. It's good.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, my mistakes are the only way I've learned over time.
Right.
Somebody that's been married for 3 years, how do you go into a marriage and use your stoicism to your collective advantage, right? I don't want to say that you use it to manipulate at all, because I don't.
No, I don't know. I hope I don't. We've been married for 3 years. We've been together for 7 years. And I'll tell you, one thing that makes it a lot easier is the fact that I married the right woman. I married a woman who is very kind, very gentle, very bright. She is not manipulative. She is not the type that would, cause a lot of stress and tension within the relationship. Has not always been, I can't say it's always been that way throughout my lifetime. That's why I didn't get married until I was in my 40s. Now that I'm almost 50, I'm certainly glad I've settled down with her. So one thing I do is, if there ever is any incipient conflict, if I feel that I'm starting to get frustrated or starting to get maybe a little edgy, first of all, I try to talk myself down out of that state. I try to make sure that it doesn't come out in my voice, in my mannerisms, my facial expressions. I'm not very good at governing my facial expressions.
I have a real difficult time with the facial expressions.
That's where my wife always catches me. She's always like, "Okay, what is it? I just did that thing with your eye where I know you're frustrated." I was like, when I communicate it, I always do my best. And of course, my best is not always perfect, but I always do my best to just state what I'm thinking and what I'm experiencing as rationally and as gently as possible. The one thing I'm very, very confident about is there is no interaction, there is no conflict that I want to win badly enough that I'm willing to sacrifice my marriage for it, right? If I have to give way, if I have to compromise, I'm certainly willing to do that about most of the issues that come up. And when it comes to fundamental values, we agree about most of that. So that kind of stuff doesn't come up. And be gentle. Just always I'm always try to make sure that I'm as gentle as I can be in my conversations with my wife, and she is just naturally very gentle. For me, it's work. For her, it's her nature. Yeah,
that's so. That is definitely work I've been working on. Is trying not to. My wife is also a gentle person, but can be emotion. She can be very.
What are you trying not to say?
No, I mean, she could be very sharp. She could be very, she could get loud, and I respond loud to loud, and my loud is not her loud, right? So
right.
But also I find that sometimes being gentle when she's being loud means I'm not being heard, which can breed some more frustration on my end, which then leads to nobody's listening to anybody, right?
Right. Well, obviously, I'm in no position to give marital advice. That's not my intention.
No.
I would just say to anyone in any conflict, if you're speaking gently and rationally and compassionately, and if you feel like you're not being heard and that causes you frustration, at the moment you start to feel that frustration, that should trigger this response. Wait a minute, I don't have to be frustrated by this, right? Your frustration is largely your doing. And I say this as a guy who gets frustrated and angry a lot myself. But she's not under your control. Her mood, her words, her behavior is not under control, but you are, right? So
yep.
The next time that arises, what would Stoic advice be? Stoic advice would be remain calm, remain rational, communicate in rational fashion. And if it doesn't have the desired effect, well, it's the desire that's the problem, right? You don't have to insist on this effect as opposed to that effect. You see what happens,
right?
And you hope that gradually the heat comes down.
Yeah, that's something that I definitely work on.
I do too, and I'm very imperfect, but thankfully my wife is not. My wife is perfect. So
smart man.
There's another piece of advice I always give to people who are getting married. If they ever ask me, I say, here's what you do. Now, this only works if you marry a good woman. You have to marry the right woman. But having done that, when your wife tells you to do something, do it. That's it. That works. When your wife tells you to do something.
Or you just pick up the dog shit before she has to ask you.
Yeah, so she doesn't even have to tell you. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
If she's telling you the same thing more than once, you're probably already fouled up. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, Bill, I want to thank you for coming on today. And the book, Meditations on Self-Discipline and Failure, I believe I've read probably 3/4 of it. It touches on politics, it touches on relationships, and it touches on self-control, and it touches on discipline, which are such key tenets to life.
Absolutely.
And to trading. And thank you for putting your effort and your time into this project and the book, and continued success. I highly suggest people pick it up. And thanks for coming on today, Bill. Appreciate it.
I appreciate that very much, and thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to participate. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, you're welcome.